Welcome to Wealth and Means. Advice dressed up like hard work.
Each week, we explore ideas that help you pause, reflect, and think more deeply about the opportunities all around you.
It's the perfect mix. A little information, a few stats, some real-world insights, and just enough deep talk to make you feel smarter before your second cup of coffee.
Today's episode is about filters, not reactions. The quiet signals hiding underneath the noise. The questions people are starting to ask before they buy, invest, create, or believe. We start with what you didn't see in the news, where trust, authorship, and intention show up everywhere, from kitchen appliances to AI tools, from fitness culture to physical media. Then it's Wake Up Ready, breaking down a data-heavy week that will quietly set direction for markets, rates, and risk appetite as the year gets going. After that, a knowledge bomb on bonds, the biggest market no one brags about and the one that keeps portfolios standing when everything else wobbles. We take a quick detour through Humor Me, where New Year's optimism meets reality. We step into the greater debate to ask whether AI slop is just the messy early phase of a new creative medium, or a break between output and meaning itself. And we close with Invent Again, the story of Granville T, an inventor who solved coordination before it had a name, built systems people depended on without noticing, and reminds us that the most important innovations don't shout. They disappear into the world and make everything else possible.
A quick thank you to our sponsor, Nost Moments at nostmoments.io. Share your most precious memories. Share the Nost Moments. All right, before we get to the headlines everyone saw, let's talk about the stuff that quietly took off last week. The conversations that didn't make the front page, but absolutely made it into search bars, feeds, and group chats. Let's start in the kitchen, because somehow that's where half the internet went. Air fryers weren't trending because people think they're dangerous. They were trending because people started asking what they're made of. Suddenly, creators are slicing open baskets, zooming in on coatings, talking about PFAS-free materials like they're reading an ingredient label on oat milk, stainless steel, ceramic interiors, third-party certifications. This isn't a gadget story, it's a trust story. Ingredient transparency, which used to live in food and skincare, is now moving into appliances.
Once people learn a new thing to worry about, they never unlearn it.
Exactly, and once consumers start asking material questions, brands either have answers or they don't. From kitchens to scalp care, because yes, that's a real transition now. Japanese-style head spas quietly exploded on TikTok and Shorts last week, not because of some celebrity endorsement, but because they're incredibly watchable. Water flowing, massage tools, before and after scalp shots that feel half wellness, half ASMR. What's interesting here is the business model. These are local services, not national brands, but video turned them into national awareness machines. No franchise required. Visibility now comes from the feed, not the storefront. Then there's AI, but not the version you're used to hearing about. The buzz wasn't about one killer app. It was about tool churn, AI video generators, text-to-audio platforms, new voices, faster renders. This one's better comparison videos popping up everywhere. The takeaway isn't that anyone's won, it's that no one has. Switching costs are basically zero. If you're building in this space, realism alone isn't enough anymore. The real moat is whether your tool actually fits into how people work. And speaking of work, education may be the quietest AI adoption story happening right now. Teachers aren't talking about replacing classrooms. They're talking about saving time, lesson planning, grading assistance, personalized quizzes, admin work that used to eat nights and weekends. Framed this way, AI stops being threatening and starts being useful. That matters, because education may end up being one of the least controversial AI deployment zones if it stays positioned as support, not substitution. Now zoom out away from screens entirely. Search and social chatter show renewed interest in immersive, in-real-life experiences, walkthrough exhibits, projection art, interactive theater, things you can't screenshot and scroll past. As feeds fill up with AI-generated everything, presence itself is becoming the premium. The stuff that works best is the stuff that refuses to live entirely online. Which brings us, oddly enough, to running shoes and supplements. Carbon-plated running shoes, once strictly elite, are now being reviewed by everyday athletes. At the same time, creatine is getting a rebrand as gummies. Same science, better vibes. The overlap here is telling. Performance optimization is going mainstream, but only if it's packaged in a lifestyle-friendly way. Measurable gains, no intimidation required. Crypto conversations took a similar turn last week, but toward mechanics, not hype. Instead of narratives, people were debating on-chain design, burn mechanisms, compounding rewards, snowball effects. Less, what's the story? More, how does this actually work? That shift matters. It suggests retail participants are getting more literate about incentive design and that poorly constructed tokens will get exposed faster. Fashion had its own early signals, too. Forecasting for 2026 is already circulating. Earth tones, texture, pattern tights. What's notable isn't the trends themselves, but where they're appearing first. Creator styling videos, runway breakdowns, not stores. Fashion cycles are being set visually and socially long before they hit sales data. And that ties directly into another quiet reversal: physical media. Vinyl, DVDs, Blu-ray box sets, actual books. The framing isn't nostalgia, it's control, ownership, permanence. No algorithm deciding what disappears next. As AI content floods feeds, physical media is being repositioned as something stable, human, and fixed. Expect more hybrid models where physical becomes the premium layer, not the relic. That human-made framing popped up elsewhere too. Faith-based films quietly outperformed expectations again, reigniting conversations about Bible-inspired storytelling reaching broader audiences. Strip away the ideology, and the lesson is simple. Cohesive communities still mobilize attention better than fragmented ones. Studios are noticing. At the same time, some creators are explicitly leaning away from AI, promoting books, films, and analog art as a kind of cultural counterweight. Human crafted is starting to sound like a label. Think organic, handmade, authored.
When everything can be generated, intention becomes the luxury.
Spot on. That tension is fueling another meta conversation. AI slop. Not AI itself, but low-effort, mass-generated content overwhelming feeds. The backlash is real, and it's pushing platforms toward a harder problem. How do you rank quality when quantity is effectively infinite? Podcast discovery is feeling that shift too. An episode of Jim and Them featuring Corey Feldman broke out, not because it was polished, but because it was raw, controversial, and clipped aggressively. Discovery is no longer subscription first. It's clip first. Debate travels further than production value. TikTok showed the same pattern. Formats, not topics, won last week. A Zootopia-style couple selfie edit took off because it was instantly recognizable and easy to remix. Same with the 2025 achievements cake and failure cake trend. Structured self-reflection wrapped in humor and irony. Vulnerable enough to feel real. Tidy enough for the algorithm. Finally, markets. A handful of non-megacap names saw unusual volume without being headline stocks. Vanda Pharmaceuticals moved on classic catalyst speculation, binary event-driven interest. NewScale Power, BigBear.ai, and Defiance S&P 500 Momentum ETF traded more on theme crowding than fundamentals. XPeng and NEO reacted to the usual China EV sentiment swings, and Intel reminded everyone, again, that it's still one of the market's most narrative-sensitive names. Meanwhile, OTC names like CBD of Denver and Ozop Energy saw bursts of attention, mostly speculative, mostly fleeting. Volume is a spotlight, not a verdict. So if there's a through line this week, it's this. People aren't just reacting anymore, they're filtering, asking what things are made of, how systems work, who created something, and why. That's what you didn't see in the news. Now, let's wake up ready. Monday's about figuring out what kind of week we're actually in. Growth week, slowdown week, or everyone stares at rates again week. We start at 10 a.m. Eastern with the ISM Manufacturing Index. This is the pulse check on U.S. factories, new orders, production, employment. The real question is whether manufacturers are seeing fresh demand or just burning through inventory. If ISM shows strength, energy, metals, and industrial tech get some breathing room. If it slips, the slowdown narrative creeps in early. Right alongside that, we get U.S. construction spending, which feeds directly into steel, copper, housing finance, and infrastructure momentum.
So if both manufacturing and construction soften at the same time, that's when markets start doubting the soft landing.
Correct. That's when cyclicals get nervous and defensives start to look smarter. Later in the day, Treasury bill auctions hit 13 and 26-week paper. Not flashy, but higher yields here feed straight into bank funding costs and short-term rate expectations. And quietly, in the background, some smaller ex-US earnings reports trickle in. Nothing huge, but enough to nudge overnight sentiment if something surprises. Tuesday is where things get loud. CES opens in Las Vegas, and this is the annual collision of hype and hardware. AI devices, EV tech, semiconductors, energy efficiency. The real question isn't what looks cool on stage, but what ships, who's partnering, and who actually has a timeline investors can believe.
Every week it feels like everything suddenly uses AI. What actually moves stocks?
Partnerships, supply chains, and revenue hints. Anything that turns a keynote slide into a cash flow story. Running alongside CES are Wolfe Research's autos and tech meetings. Quieter, investor-focused conversations where you often get the unfiltered version of the story. Meanwhile, in Florida, Day 2 of Goldman Sachs' Energy, Clean Tech, and Utilities Conference rolls on, with updates on uranium, carbon management, renewables, the stuff that doesn't trend on social media but moves portfolios. We also get the U.S. Services PMI in the morning. Manufacturing gets the headlines, but services are where most jobs, fintech spend, and enterprise software demand actually live. If services wobble, tech multiples feel it fast. Wednesday is all about labor, and this is where narratives can flip. At 8:15 a.m., we get ADP private payrolls, a first look at hiring momentum heading into the official jobs report. Then at 10 a.m., it's a double hit, ISM services and JOLTS job openings.
This is where the Fed watchers really start paying attention, right?
Absolutely. Strong services and tight job openings keep higher for longer alive. Weak services and falling openings bring rate cuts back into the conversation. We also get factory orders, tying back to Monday's manufacturing data. Are companies still investing or pulling back on CapEx? CES continues through the day, and Goldman's Energy Conference wraps up, often saving the most candid comments for the end when the doors are closing. Thursday is quieter, but sneakily important. We start with weekly jobless claims, the fastest read on labor stress. One data point won't move markets, but a trend definitely will. Then we see U.S. trade data and wholesale inventories. The key question here is whether inventories are rising because demand is strong or because goods aren't moving. That feeds directly into GDP expectations and commodity demand. Also on Thursday, NewtekOne hosts its Investor and Analyst Day. It's niche, but these events can matter for fintech and specialty finance names trying to reset expectations early in the year. And then Friday, the main event. At 8:30 a.m., the U.S. jobs report hits. Payrolls, wages, unemployment. This is the number everyone's been circling all week.
So everything else is basically the warm-up?
Yes, sir. Strong job growth and hot wages push yields up and make equities flinch. Cooling jobs and stable pay let risk assets exhale. At 10 a.m., we get University of Michigan consumer sentiment, a read on how confident households feel heading into the year. And before lunch, the NY Fed nowcast updates, quietly nudging GDP expectations for the quarter. The weekend itself is light on scheduled fireworks, which is normal for early January. That's when analysts digest CES takeaways, energy conference notes, and the macro data, and start positioning for earnings season. Bottom line, this week is about direction. Is growth holding up? Is the labor market cooling gently or cracking? And is tech innovation translating into real dollars? That's how you wake up ready.
All right, knowledge bomb time. And today we're talking about the most misunderstood, least bragged about, quietly powerful part of investing, bonds. Because while stocks get all the attention, the rallies, the crashes, the memes, the bond market is actually bigger, a lot bigger. Roughly $145 trillion in bonds globally versus about $115 trillion in stocks. Bonds are the engine room of the global economy. Governments run on them, companies grow with them, and portfolios survive bad years because of them. Here's the simplest way to think about a bond. It's an IOU. You're not buying ownership, you're lending money to a government, a city, or a business. In return, they promise two things: regular interest payments and your original money back at the end. You're the bank, they're the borrower, no vibes, just terms. Now, bond vocabulary sounds intimidating, but it's not. You really only need a few concepts. Par value is just the amount you loaned, usually $1,000. The coupon is the interest rate. 5% means $50 a year. Maturity is when you get your money back. And yield is what you actually earn once price is factored in. And here's the golden rule. This explains most bond behavior. Bond prices and interest rates move in opposite directions. Rates go up, old bonds look worse, prices fall. Rates go down, old bonds look better, prices rise. Once that clicks, a lot of the mystery disappears. Not all bonds are created equal. U.S. Treasuries, safest game in town, backed by the U.S. government. Lower yields, near zero default risk. Municipal bonds, munis, are issued by states and cities. Their quiet superpower is tax-free interest, which can matter a lot once your income climbs. Corporate bonds come next. Investment-grade bonds from stable companies pay solid income. High-yield or junk bonds pay more, but you're taking real default risk in exchange. There are also inflation-protected bonds, like TIPS, which adjust with inflation, so your purchasing power doesn't slowly bleed out. So why do bonds matter in a portfolio? Because stocks are the engine, but bonds are the shock absorbers. Bonds pay income, they reduce volatility, and when markets panic, money often runs toward bonds, not away from them. That's why the classic 60-40 portfolio existed for decades. It wasn't about maximizing returns, it was about surviving long enough for compounding to work. Bonds feel boring right up until the moment they save your portfolio. And boring has built some very serious fortunes. Take Bill Gross, the original bond king. He built PIMCO into a multi-trillion-dollar powerhouse by navigating interest rates and crises like 2008, when bonds quietly did what stocks couldn't. Or Jeffrey Gundlach, often called the new bond king, still running one of the most respected fixed-income firms today. Even Warren Buffett holds massive piles of treasuries, not because they're exciting, but because they're reliable. And here's the good news: you don't need to pick individual bonds. Bond ETFs make this simple. You can buy the entire U.S. bond market in one click with Vanguard Total Bond Market ETF or iShares Core U.S. Aggregate Bond ETF. Thousands of bonds, low fees, instant diversification. If you want ultra-safe short-term exposure, funds like Vanguard Short-Term Treasury ETF act like a smarter parking lot for cash. You buy these just like stocks, one share, any brokerage, full liquidity. So here's the knowledge bomb takeaway. Bonds aren't about excitement. They're about resilience. They're about income when markets stall. And they're about staying in the game when volatility tries to knock you out. Stocks help you grow rich. Bonds help you stay rich. And if investing is a marathon, not a meme, then bonds are the part of your portfolio that quietly makes sure you finish the race. That's today's knowledge bomb.
Means, I hope you had a good break from my humor. New Year's Eve is the one night of the year where we all collectively pretend that staying up past midnight is a treat, not a chore. Which brings me to Dave, a man who didn't just want to ring in the new year, he wanted to direct it. Dave spent the last week of December choreographing midnight like a film scene. Smart lights synced to turn gold, a high-tech confetti cannon armed and ready, a pristine HD recording of the Times Square ball drop queued up. By 11:55, he's standing there with a glass of overpriced sparkling cider in one hand and his phone, the so-called master control, in the other. His cat, Barnaby, watches from the couch with the quiet judgment of someone who knows this will end badly. At 11:58, the Wi-Fi router senses confidence and decides it's time for a firmware update. The TV freezes on an unmoving close-up of Ryan Seacrest's teeth. Dave starts shouting at his smart speaker like volume will help. "Play Auld Lang Syne." The speaker calmly replies that it's ordering old lawn signs from a hardware store. Panic sets in. Dave lunges for the confetti remote, trips over a decorative pillow, and sits on it. The lights don't turn gold, they enter emergency strobe mode. The confetti cannon fires sideways, blasting Barnaby directly, and the speaker, finally understanding something, starts blasting Baby Shark at full volume. At 12:03 a.m., Dave is sitting on the floor, covered in paper strips, while his cat glares from behind a curtain like an angry rainbow. He missed the countdown, forgot to make a wish, and never even took a sip of cider. He looks around and sighs. Well, at least I didn't have to pay a cover charge for this disaster.
Wealth. That reminds me of another classic New Year's Eve story that's been circulating forever, and it still lands every time. A woman stands up in a crowded bar and announces very dramatically, "At the stroke of midnight, I want every husband here to stand next to the one person who has made his life worth living." The countdown hits 0, glasses clink, and the bartender is nearly crushed to death by a sudden surge of grateful husbands rushing to his side.
Let's move on to New Year's morning, when optimism sobers up fast. Kevin wakes up buzzing with motivation. "New year, new me," he announces, already wearing joggers and brand new running shoes that still have the tag on. He decides to kick off his transformation with a sunrise run. 5 minutes in, Kevin realizes his body was not consulted. The run becomes a strange mix of wheezing and stopping every 50 yards to adjust his shoelaces. When he finally makes it home, his smartwatch proudly congratulates him on completing 0.4 miles. Undeterred, Kevin moves on to resolution number 2, eat clean, avoid sugar. That plan holds until about 3:17 p.m., when a leftover slice of holiday cheesecake accidentally falls into his mouth. By midnight, Kevin is on the couch, watching a fitness influencer on YouTube while eating chips and saying, "Next year, for sure." Because that's the real tradition. New Year's resolutions are like fireworks, bright, exciting, and mostly gone by morning.
Welcome back to the greater debate, the debate that should happen but doesn't. So we make it happen anyway, through imagination, caffeine, and the stubborn belief that progress doesn't require a purity test. Tonight's topic sounds harmless until you say it slowly. Is AI slop just the ugly early phase of a new creative medium, or is it something fundamentally different, imitation dressed up as art? Arguing that AI slop is not a cultural collapse but a familiar growing pain, history repeating itself with better processors and worse vibes, Nano Banana. And arguing that AI slop isn't art in beta, but a category mistake that confuses output with authorship, delivered with the calm precision of a man who doesn't confuse novelty with meaning, Ted Chiang. Let's begin. Nano Banana opens by doing what optimists always do, zooming out. He says we've seen this movie before, and every time we forget the first act was rough. Animation began as jittery black and white shorts. Color film looked garish. Early CGI looked like plastic trying to pass for life. In the moment, all of it was dismissed as cheap, derivative, even soulless. In retrospect, we call it experimentation. And then Nano invokes the patron saint of creative pivots, Walt Disney. Disney, Nano reminds us, never defended a medium. He defended storytelling. Everything else was a tool. Black and white cartoons, useful until they weren't. Silent shorts, fine until sound opened a new door. 7-minute cartoons, safe until Walt decided they had hit a ceiling and bet the company on feature-length animation. His peers called Snow White Disney's folly. Walt called it curiosity. Nano points out that Disney didn't just change length, he changed depth, championing the multiplane camera to create dimensional worlds, locking down early Technicolor exclusivity, and forcing the industry to catch up. When television appeared, Hollywood panicked. Walt leaned in, calling TV the coming thing, using it to fund theme parks, talk directly to audiences, and build a new kind of media convergence. When screens felt limiting, he moved into audio animatronics, robotics, calling them just another dimension of animation. Tradition in values, radicalism in delivery. Nano's point is simple. History doesn't reward people who protect the old medium. It rewards people who use it as scaffolding for the next one. Then Ted Chiang responds, calmly dismantling the analogy. Disney, he says, never removed intention from the process. He multiplied it. Every technological leap Disney embraced increased the number of human decisions behind the work. Generative AI does the opposite. It produces plausible artifacts without standing behind a single choice. Art is not defined by how it looks or how it lands emotionally. It's defined by the fact that someone meant it. AI doesn't mean, it predicts. Nano counters by widening the frame again. He brings up CGI. Early computer graphics, he says, were clunky experiments. John Whitney's mechanical animations in the 1950s, the abstract spirals in Vertigo. To traditional animators, it probably looked like soulless math pretending to be art. Then George Lucas came along and treated digital tools not as threats, but as liberation. Lucas pushed digital filmmaking the way Disney pushed sound and color. He argued film was rigid, digital was malleable. He compared the shift to moving from frescoes to oil painting, less discipline, more possibility. Digital workflows let filmmakers iterate, preview, rewrite, reshoot. Early CGI looked rough, yes, but it expanded what stories could physically do. And audiences, they adapted faster than critics expected. If early CGI had been judged by its worst outputs, Nano says, we never get Jurassic Park, we never get modern cinema. Slop was the price of admission. Ted doesn't deny the history, but he rejects the conclusion. CGI, he says, didn't replace authorship. It changed the brush. The filmmaker still chose every shot, every cut, every frame worth keeping. Generative AI collapses that chain. A few high-level prompts replace thousands of micro-decisions. Editing a machine's outputs is not the same as composing deliberately. Selection is not authorship. Commitments. Nano reframes the danger. Maybe the real threat isn't AI, it's cowardice. Humans outsourcing not just labor, but taste. AI doesn't lower standards. It exposes how many people were already comfortable with formula. When creation becomes abundant, discernment becomes the scarce skill. In that world, finishing, not generating, becomes the art. That's when Ted lands his cleanest hit. Speed is not neutral. Cultures are trained by what they consume. Flood the environment with plausible, frictionless content long enough, and depth begins to feel inefficient. Novelty replaces originality. Engagement replaces expression. Markets will not defend intention. They never have. If we don't value meaning made deliberately, we won't notice when it disappears. The room goes quiet, not because someone won, but because both arguments landed. Nano concedes first. Markets love slop. Capital will always chase good enough at scale. Artists will feel the pressure before audiences do. But abundance has always been the tax innovation charges, and it has never stopped great work from emerging. Ted concedes too. AI is useful for summaries, drafts, analysis, play. This isn't a call for panic or prohibition, but usefulness is not authorship, and efficiency is not expression. If we don't defend intention explicitly, we won't realize when we've traded it away. Their closing visions diverge sharply. Nano Banana trusts evolution. He believes curiosity wins, that the noise will force discernment, and that the difference will be obvious not in how something was made, but in how carefully it was finished. Disney didn't fear new doors. Neither should we. Ted Chiang trusts responsibility. He believes meaning requires a maker willing to stand behind it, and that without guardrails, optimization will quietly hollow out creativity while calling it progress. And that's the greater debate. Two philosophies, two knockout blows each. Is AI slop the compost heap of the next creative renaissance, or the moment we confuse output for expression? That depends on whether you think creativity should be optimized or answered for.
Let's invent again. Before we talk about the invention, you have to understand the problem Granville T. Woods was trying to solve, and why it mattered so much that it was literally killing people. In the late 1800s, the railroad was the bloodstream of the American economy. It moved coal, steel, people, mail, everything. But once a train pulled out of the station, it vanished into silence. Engineers couldn't hear from dispatchers. Dispatchers couldn't see where trains were. Two locomotives could be barreling toward each other on the same track with no idea the other existed. Collisions weren't rare accidents. They were a known cost of progress. Granville Woods looked at that system and saw something broken. Not philosophically broken, but mechanically broken. And unlike many of his contemporaries, Woods didn't come at the problem from a lecture hall or a lab funded by wealthy patrons. He came at it from grease-stained hands and lived experience. Born in 1856 to free black parents, Woods had little formal schooling. He learned by apprenticing as a machinist and blacksmith, working railroads and steel mills, serving as chief engineer on a steamship, and obsessively teaching himself electrical and mechanical engineering at night. By the time he began patenting inventions in the 1880s, he didn't just understand railroads, he understood how they failed. That's what makes his most important breakthrough, the induction telegraph, so quietly radical. Before Woods, communication followed the train only when it physically stopped. His insight was deceptively simple. Trains were already surrounded by electromagnetic fields from telegraph wires running parallel to the tracks. Instead of trying to connect to the wire, why not listen to it? Using electromagnetic induction, Woods designed a system where a moving train could send and receive messages without any physical connection. A coil mounted beneath the train picked up signals induced by the current pulsing through nearby telegraph lines. The train could talk to stations. Trains could talk to other trains. Dispatchers could finally know where everything was in real time. This wasn't just clever engineering. It was the birth of mobile, wireless communication applied to safety-critical infrastructure. And it worked. Railroads adopted the system because it reduced collisions, increased throughput, and saved lives. The railroad suddenly had a nervous system. If you want to understand Woods' genius, this is the key distinction from figures like Edison. Edison built products people could see and touch. Woods built systems people depended on but rarely noticed, until they failed. He wasn't inventing light bulbs, he was inventing coordination. And the induction telegraph was just one piece. Woods went on to patent systems for multiplex telegraphy that allowed multiple messages to travel simultaneously. Early versions of fleet tracking, improved air brakes that centralized stopping power across an entire train, and third-rail electrification systems that moved power delivery out of the locomotive and into the infrastructure itself. That last one quietly made the modern city possible. Steam engines couldn't run deep underground without suffocating passengers. Electric trains could. Woods' third-rail concepts enabled subways, elevated trains, and urban mass transit, cleaner, faster, denser cities. If you've ever ridden a subway and not thought about how it gets power safely, you're living inside one of his ideas. What makes this story hit differently today is how familiar the logic feels. The problems Woods was solving in the 1880s are the same problems technologists are still wrestling with in 2026. How do moving objects communicate continuously, safely, and autonomously? How do you design systems that assume humans will make mistakes and correct for them anyway? Modern rail systems use positive train control, combining GPS, wireless data, and onboard computers to automatically stop trains before collisions or overspeed events. That's Woods' induction telegraph, plus his braking logic, rewritten in software. Autonomous vehicles rely on V2V and V2X communication so cars can see each other beyond human perception. That's Woods' insight again. Awareness beats reaction. Even experimental electric roads that wirelessly charge vehicles while they're moving are applying the same inductive principles, just transferring power instead of data. What's remarkable is that Woods was doing all of this while fighting patent battles against Thomas Edison and winning. Twice. Edison challenged Woods' claims, and twice the courts ruled in Woods' favor. Despite offers to join Edison's company, Woods chose to remain independent, protecting his intellectual property at enormous personal risk in a deeply racist era. His inventions were eventually licensed by giants like General Electric and Westinghouse, embedded into systems that scaled far beyond his own name. That may be the most modern part of this story. Granville Woods reminds us that the most valuable innovations aren't always consumer-facing or flashy. They're infrastructural. They disappear into the background. They make everything else possible. When we talk about smart cities, autonomous transport, and connected infrastructure today, we're really just upgrading the nervous system Woods helped invent. He didn't just make trains safer. He showed that coordination itself is a technology, and that once you solve for it, entire economies move faster, cleaner, and with far fewer funerals. That's not a footnote in history. it's a blueprint. That's it for another episode of Wealth and Means, advice dressed up like hard work.
We hope you enjoyed the range, from kitchen questions to capital flows, scrolling culture to systems you can't screenshot, bond math to behavioral mishaps, algorithmic abundance to authored intention, and from noisy creation to quiet coordination.
Subscribe, rate, and share this episode. It helps more than you think.
We do this for you to help you have a better week, a sharper mind, and maybe even a longer attention span.
And a special thanks to our sponsor, Nost Moments, because the best investments are still your memories.
Until next time, stay curious
Stay kind.
and keep compounding